The MG42's roar did more than dominate the battlefield. It announced the crew's location to every enemy within earshot, and it made survival a question of seconds, not minutes. Each time this gun unleashed its torrent of fire, the world closed in. Allied manuals demanded immediate suppression. Artillery planned the gun's destruction, and every movement risked instant retaliation. The horror was not just what the MG42 could do, it was what the weapon made inevitable for those behind it. Why would anyone serve a weapon that guaranteed both power and annihilation? The answer begins the very moment the trigger was pulled. When the MG42 opened fire, it did more than send bullets downrange. Its mechanical roar, an unbroken metallic tearing, carried for over 1 kilometer in open country. Soldiers on both sides learned to recognize that sound within seconds. Allied infantry called it the buzzsaw. The nickname captured the panic it spread and the certainty it brought. In the chaos of battle, this single sound cut through confusion, broadcasting the gunner's position to every trained ear. Survival collapsed the moment the first burst began. The danger did not end with noise. Every fourth round in the MG42 belt was a tracer, burning magnesium bright enough to carve orange lines into the sky by day and streaks of fire at night. These arcs were meant to help the gunner adjust aim, but they also betrayed the crew's exact location. Tracer streams stretched up to 800 meters, visible even through smoke or hedgerow gaps. At night, the effect was more pronounced. Fiery threads leading straight back to the source. Tracers made aim visible and positions obvious. In open fields, the combination of sound and tracer could be pinpointed in less than 15 seconds. In the hedgerows of Normandy or the forests of the Ardennes, muffled echoes and flashing arcs still gave away the nest, though it might take half a minute longer. Urban ruins amplified the roar, bouncing it between shattered walls, and the muzzle flash lit windows and doors. Visibility accelerated targeting across every terrain. Allied manuals warned that the MG42 signature was a call to action. Mortar teams listened for the buzzsaw. Artillery spotters watched for tracer walls. Platoon leaders marked the source for suppression. The moment the gun fired, the countdown began. Every second of sustained fire drew in the enemy, tightening the noose. For the crew behind the gun, there was no hiding. Their weapons' power made them visible, audible, and instantly marked for destruction. German weapons engineers faced a problem with the MG34. Its precision machined parts slowed production and strained resources as the war intensified. In 1942, the MG42 arrived as the answer. The weapon was designed for speed, not subtlety. Stamped steel replaced complex milling, slashing build times by more than a third. By 1944, over 200,000 units poured from factories in a single year, a scale unthinkable with the older model. This shift was not just about numbers. The MG42's construction reflected a doctrine that valued overwhelming firepower above concealment. German infantry squads were reorganized around the gun, with riflemen assigned to protect and supply it. The weapon became the centerpiece of every attack and defense, not a support tool, but the core of squad tactics. Every technical decision, the belt feed, the quick change barrel, the heavy tripod, served a single purpose: keep the gun firing for as long as possible, regardless of exposure. The gun alone weighed 25 pounds. A full load of ammunition and spare barrels pushed the burden even higher. Moving the weapon under fire was slow and risky, but doctrine demanded the crew stay on the gun, holding positions and delivering suppression until ordered otherwise. Mass production made the MG42 available in numbers the Allies could not ignore. Its presence forced enemy commanders to rethink every advance. But the same features that made it dominant also made its crew vulnerable. Sustained fire meant sustained presence. Stamped parts made the gun replaceable, but the men behind it were not. The logic of German design solved the problem of firepower, but it left the question of survival unanswered. Allied training officers drilled a single rule into every assault and support squad: neutralize the enemy machine gun above all else. Field manuals from Britain, the United States, and the Soviet Union described German machine guns as the backbone of defensive positions. The MG42, with its unmistakable roar and tracer streams, became the target in every advance. Infantry instructors taught recruits to listen for the buzzsaw, to watch for the orange streaks, and to mark the source for immediate suppression. The official response was systematic. Units used smoke grenades to blind the nest, mortars to pound the area, and coordinated flanking maneuvers to close in from the sides. Doctrine left no room for improvisation. Allied section leaders carried explicit instructions to prioritize the machine gun, even before snipers or officers. Forward observers learned to call in artillery at the first sign of a German MG position, often within seconds of detection. Tank commanders were briefed to scan for muzzle flashes and to direct fire at suspected nests, regardless of infantry support. Training films produced in 1943 and 1944 showed soldiers practicing 5-second rushes from cover to cover, timing their movements for the split seconds between bursts. Manuals warned that the MG42's fire was not just a hazard, it was the linchpin holding the German line together. Remove the gun and the defense would falter. Leave it standing, and every advance risked stalling in a wall of lead. On paper and in practice, the order was clear: kill the gun first or lose the fight. The MG42's engineering promised relentless firepower, but its mechanics imposed a deadly rhythm. Each burst of 250 rounds pushed the barrel to the edge, glowing red, accuracy falling away as heat warped the steel. Doctrine called for a quick change system. A lever flipped open. The gunner yanked the scalding barrel free with asbestos mitts or a hooked chain, and the assistant snapped a cool replacement into place. In training, this cycle could take as little as 10 seconds. Under fire, it stretched closer to 20 seconds. Every second counted. The gun itself weighed 25 pounds. The Lafette tripod, ammunition belts, and spare barrels added another 30 or more. Every move was slow, deliberate, and exposed. The tripod locked the gun in a fixed arc, ideal for suppression but unforgiving if the enemy closed in. Barrel changes forced the crew to crouch low, hands fumbling with hot metal as the gun fell silent. In these moments, attackers watched for the pause, timing their advance to the gun's enforced silence. An MG42 crew depended on flawless coordination. The assistant's job, handling barrels and feeding belts, became a matter of survival. A missed step or dropped glove could cost precious seconds. Each swap was a signal. The gun is down, now is the time. Enemy squads learned to wait for this window, launching grenades or rushing forward as soon as the firing stopped. The weapon's power was absolute, but its mechanical needs created a countdown. Repeated over and over, each cycle a fresh invitation for the enemy to strike. An MG42 crew was more than a gunner behind a trigger. Doctrine called for a tightly grouped team: gunner, assistant, and ammunition carriers. Each assigned a role that could not be skipped or replaced on the fly. The gunner fired and aimed. The assistant fed belts and swapped barrels. Others hauled ammunition, and sometimes the heavy Lafette tripod. Every action depended on the person beside you. If the assistant was hit, barrel changes stalled. If an ammo carrier fell, the gun ran dry. There was no overlap. Each man's absence created an immediate, unfixable gap. This concentration of roles made the crew a single point of failure. Allied tactics exploited this vulnerability with area fire, mortars, grenades, and machine guns aimed not just at the weapon, but at the cluster of bodies around it. One shell or burst could silence the gun, not by destroying the steel, but by breaking the chain of hands that kept it running. German manuals stressed teamwork, but on the battlefield, that teamwork became a weakness. The MG42's demand for constant feeding and maintenance forced men to huddle together, often in cramped pits or behind sandbags, exposed to the same danger at the same moment. When the enemy closed in, a single casualty could unravel the entire operation. There was no time to retrain or reshuffle under fire. The MG42's firepower drew attention, but its clustered crew gave attackers a clear, concentrated target. In the end, the gun's strength, its dependence on a synchronized team, became its greatest liability. Allied small unit leaders adapted quickly once the MG42's presence became certain. In the fields of Normandy and the forests of the Eastern Front, attack squads learned to bait the gun into revealing itself. A feint, a sudden rush, or a noisy probe drew the first burst. The gunner, compelled by doctrine and the threat of enemy movement, opened fire. The moment the buzzsaw started, every rifleman knew where to look. Smoke grenades followed, rolling out to shroud the approach. Instructors drilled the timing. As soon as tracers cut through the haze, squads advanced in bounds, one group moving while the other covered. Each rush was measured to the MG42's firing rhythm. 5 seconds of sprint, then drop and wait for the next burst. Allied manuals called this bounding overwatch, a method that turned the gun's power into a predictable cycle. Mortar teams zeroed in on the sound, sending shells to pin the crew or force a barrel change. When the gun paused, attackers exploited the silence, closing ground or flanking along the edges of the smoke. In the hedgerows, a single squad could use terrain to slip within grenade range before the gunner could react. On the Eastern Front, Soviet infantry massed movement behind rolling barrages, then surged forward as soon as the MG42's fire faltered. What began as fear became routine. Every Allied squad leader learned to recognize the gun's cues and capitalize on its pauses. The MG42's dominance demanded a response, and by 1944, that response had become method, systematic, relentless, and increasingly effective. Orders pinned MG42 crews to their positions long after the first burst. German defensive doctrine, shaped by years of attrition, demanded that machine guns anchor the line at all costs. Positions were mapped in advance, plotted on regimental diagrams, and assigned fields of fire that overlapped with neighboring nests. Once the gun was emplaced, withdrawal was not an option. Reports from the Eastern Front to Normandy detail how crews were instructed to hold until relieved or destroyed, even as enemy fire closed in. The Lafette tripod, favored for its stability, locked the gun's arc and made rapid movement impossible. Ammunition and spare barrels arrived in bulk, not for retreat, but to keep the gun firing through bombardment and assault. Commanders relied on the MG42 to break every attack. Orders circulated down the chain. Hold the position. Do not cease fire except to change barrels. Even as Allied doctrine evolved to target these nests first, German directives rarely changed. Defensive lines were redrawn around the guns, not the men. Pre-registered Allied artillery made each plotted nest a future target, but the expectation remained. Stand fast, absorb the blow, and return fire until overrun. Crews understood the consequences. Once the gun opened up, there would be no relief, no withdrawal, and no escape from the barrage that followed. The same firepower that dominated the field became a cage, built by orders and reinforced by doctrine. Every directive to hold sealed the fate of those behind the trigger, turning survival into an afterthought. Fatigue crept in long before the enemy reached the wire. For the men behind the MG42, the job was more than pulling a trigger. Every sense strained for the first hint of incoming fire, an echo in the hedgerow or a flicker in the smoke. Hours of waiting and nerves stretched thin meant reaction time slowed, and hands fumbled under pressure. German medical reports from late 1944 describe machine gun crews as especially prone to exhaustion, their focus eroded by the constant expectation of attack. Each new burst demanded rapid calculation. Count the rounds, watch the belt, listen for shouted warnings from the flanks. But fatigue dulled the edge. Tasks that took seconds in training stretched out under combat stress. Barrel changes lagged, belts tangled, hands trembled. The anticipation of retaliation became a tactical problem, not just a feeling. Every delay, every misstep increased the odds that the next incoming shell would find its mark. The MG42's firepower was unmatched, but the human element faltered under the weight of relentless pressure. By late 1944, the MG42 signature, its roar and the wall of tracer fire, did more than alert ground troops. Allied air superiority had turned the battlefield into a network of eyes and ears. Spotter planes circling above the front scanned for the telltale flashes and arcs of machine gun fire. Once an MG42 revealed itself, pilots relayed coordinates to artillery batteries waiting behind the lines. The interval between detection and response shrank to minutes. In open fields, a single pass from a Piper Cub or Oster could mark a position for destruction. Artillery planners armed with maps and radio reports plotted barrages that blanketed the suspected nest. The gun crew, already pinned by the threat of infantry assault, now faced a new reality. Every burst risked bringing a curtain of shells or a flight of rockets. There was no warning, only the distant whistle, and then the ground erupting around the position. Defensive doctrine offered no escape. Crews crouched behind sandbags, locked to the weapon, as the air filled with splinters and earth. Survival depended on luck, not skill. The MG42's power, so absolute in the first seconds of contact, became meaningless under the weight of coordinated firepower. By the war's final months, every time the gun opened up, it started a chain reaction that ended in annihilation. The MG42 legacy endures not just in museums, but in the doctrine of modern armies that still target the machine gun first. Its lesson remains urgent. Overwhelming firepower can turn its own crew into the most expendable asset on the field. Today, survivability shapes every weapon's design. The arithmetic of exposure and annihilation never disappears. Some dangers, once invented, cannot be unlearned. Share your thoughts below.